The alien's body hung 10 feet above the ground, his armor dripping sap, his eyes glassed over, and his limbs bent in directions not taught in any war academy. The other Varnak soldiers stared up in frozen horror, but it wasn't the corpse that chilled them. It was the message carved in clean English on the bark behind him. 3 words. "We see you." The trees swayed in silence as one of them whispered, "We came to hunt." And from above, a human voice replied, clear, amused, and close enough to make their skin sensors spike. "So did I." High General Korzath had never in his 6 planetary conquests faced a species that didn't immediately bow or burn. Earth was supposed to be a side conquest. No formal military, no planetary defenses, and most laughably, no hunting class. That last part had been their favorite to mock. On Varnak, hunting was sacred. Children hunted insects at 5, scaled beasts at 10, and were dropped into predator zones at 15 with only a blade. Those who survived became warriors. Those who didn't were fertilizer. And these Earthlings? They raised pets. Fed birds. Documented animal behavior with cameras instead of claws. Their loudest war chant came from a show called Planet Earth. So the Warlords, drunk on pride and orbiting high above the tree-covered region of northern Cascadia, laughed their fangs out when the scout drones reported wooden cabins, stone-lined creeks, and fat deer wandering without fear. Korzath approved what he called a ceremonial sweep. He didn't even send warships. Just a ground team of 12 elite Carnage units, each over 8 feet tall, equipped with plasma fangs, neuroburst armor, and predator-scent tracking visors. Their only mission was to parade through the forest, collect some bones, and send a warning message. Earth was to be made an example, like the others. No casualties needed, until they wanted to. So when the first scout vanished from the group with a short, glitched scream, they assumed a local animal had gotten lucky. When the second was found face down in a shallow stream, helmet crushed and his boots missing, they began to scan more carefully. But it was the third soldier who turned the mission into a nightmare. Not because of how he died. But where? The Varnak team found him dangling above a cluster of cedar trees. It wasn't the kind of death that said, "Random animal encounter." It was a message. His body had been cleaned. Draped. Positionally arranged like an offering. The bark above him showed tool marks, cut into geometric patterns. The Varnak had a name for this kind of death. Hunt signal. Primitive tribes on other worlds sometimes used it to mark territory. But none of those tribes ever used language. English, specifically. And not one of them, ever, had the gall to use their own voice systems to mimic a warlord's command phrase. But someone had done exactly that, hacked into their comms, isolated Korzath's voice print, and played it back with perfect tone. The phrase it said before cutting out? "Welcome to my woods." The squad leader Zorith barked out orders. Their formation tightened. Their sensors swept wide. The forest was strangely alive, not with movement, but with absence. Birds stopped calling. Bugs stopped humming. Even the wind seemed reluctant to touch their helmets. They activated heat mapping. But it was useless. Everything around them, branches, moss, mud, radiated similar warmth signatures. Something was disrupting their thermals. And then it happened again. A hiss of a vine whip. A crashing fall. A scream. Gone. No one moved. Not even the new recruit, Krelt, who moments ago had boasted about how crunchy Earthlings would make a good soup base. Now he didn't speak. No one did. Far above, buried in the branches, a man watched them. Not a soldier by their standards. No armor. No war badge. Just earth-tone camouflage, a handmade bow strapped to his back, and a belt lined with dried meat, snares, and signal jammers. Miles Banner wasn't supposed to be here. The Forest Service had cleared the area last week, citing unusual electromagnetic interference. But Miles, once a recon scout, now a ranger by choice, hadn't gotten the call. Or maybe he ignored it. The forest was home. It was silent, loyal, and most importantly, it talked back when something wasn't right. Last night, it screamed. The deer had scattered without a sound. The birds vanished mid-afternoon. The creek ran slightly darker, stirred up by boots unfamiliar with its rhythm. Miles watched from a ridgeline as lights pierced the canopy, green, hungry lights. Not satellites. Not tourists. Something else. He'd seen drones before. This wasn't human. He didn't panic. He packed. 3 hours later, he had already mapped the Varnak's landing trajectory. 5 hours later, he knew their formation patterns. 6 hours in, he claimed his first one. It had taken only a snare, a bluff, and a tree root disguised as a footpath. Now, he had their attention. That was good. Because the moment they stopped underestimating him, he could really begin. Down below, the aliens spread wider. That was mistake number 2. He'd already set 6 directional noise traps. Deer call lures. Coyote barks. A recording of an old Vietnam veteran shouting threats in a voice that cracked with fury and memory. He knew what fear sounded like in every language. Even the ones spoken with mandibles. Miles moved through the trees like smoke. No trail. No crunch. No breath. He paused by a fallen branch and etched another message into the bark, right near their next campsite. It read, "Wrong forest." He smiled. Then he vanished into the undergrowth again. Zora signaled for emergency orbital scans. Static. Interference. Something in the ground was bouncing their signals back. Varnak tech had never failed this badly. Not even on acid-heavy marsh planets. Something here was different. It wasn't that Earth had no hunters. It's that Earth had too many. And one of them had stayed behind when they landed. That's when Krelt turned to speak and found his throat missing. Not cut. Just gone. A shadow slipped between trunks. Panic finally crept in. From deep in the trees, Miles whispered 2 words into their comm system. Just 2. Keep walking. Zorath dragged his squad into a tighter perimeter, the green-hued armor of the Varnak soldiers blending poorly with the earthy shadows around them. Each step they took sounded like a threat. Branches cracked beneath their boots, leaves brushed across their face shields, and even the smallest flicker of wind had them aiming weapons in all directions. The silence had weight now. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was an active, pressing stillness, as if the forest itself was listening, breathing with them, and waiting. One of the soldiers, Grell, muttered through his rebreather that the air tasted wrong. Zorath didn't respond. He was still staring at the twisted body they had cut down from the tree. Even dead, it felt like it was watching. Miles crouched beneath a fallen log no more than 50 feet away, his breath shallow, his heart slow. He had trained for years to silence his body, to become invisible not by technology but by instinct. He didn't wear armor. Didn't need a HUD. The forest was his system. Every crow's call, every gust of wind, every tremble of bark was an alert. He already knew what the aliens would try next. And he was waiting for them to make the exact kind of mistake prideful predators made. They would assume he was alone. And they would try to box him in. The first trap was simple. The Varnak had set up heat decoys, little devices the size of a hand that mimicked mammalian thermal readings. They placed them near what they thought were ideal ambush zones. Miles had already seen this trick used in training missions. It relied on the target reacting instinctively to movement and warmth. But Miles didn't react. Instead, he waited until the first alien moved to investigate his own decoy trap, then triggered the second phase. Hidden beneath a patch of pine needles was a tripwire lined with sharpened carbon-tipped stakes, taken from a logging site 3 miles east and repurposed within hours. The alien stepped forward, expecting an ambush. He got one, just not from who he expected. The crack of bone echoed once, followed by the metallic clatter of a plasma rifle hitting the ground. The team turned too late. Nothing remained of their squad mate except a smear of dark fluid and one twitching leg caught in a snare. It had happened too fast, too clean. That was what unsettled them. They were trained for war, not this. Not for a game of patience, of silence, of being observed and judged like prey in a blind spot. This wasn't war. This was something older. Zorath roared into his comms, ordering the elite pair of hunters from the mothership to drop into the zone. These two were not foot soldiers. They were bred and altered for track and kill operations, with neural enhancements and pheromone detection. The kind of monsters you sent in when your normal killers failed. Miles knew about them before they even touched the dirt. He'd caught the high-frequency buzz of their insertion pods slicing through the sky an hour before they arrived. He smiled. 2 more bodies meant 2 more traps. The first elite landed near the ridge, immediately scanning the area with an ocular sweep that could detect body temperature, breath vapor, and even fluctuations in heartbeat from 100 meters away. But Miles had already flooded the zone with scent blockers and decoy heartbeats, old speakers from wildlife research stations playing pre-recorded human breathing in staggered patterns. The second elite found one of the speakers tucked inside a log and made the mistake of opening it. A compressed charge of bear mace exploded into his face. His howl was not mechanical. It was animal. And Miles noted that. They bled. They felt pain. They weren't invincible. That meant they could be studied, outsmarted, and destroyed. Using the chaos, Miles moved deeper into the forest and triggered his terrain map. Not digital. Just ink on bark. A series of tiny carvings only he understood, marking pressure points and ambush routes layered across the slope like veins. Every stone he turned, every root he disturbed, had a purpose. Now it was time to make the forest bleed for him. He rigged the ridge with old timber-cutting wires and spiked them with nails. He laced pathways with acoustic triggers, branches meant to snap like gunfire. He was turning the woods into a panic machine, and every step the Varnak took added more noise to the lie. One of the elites tracked movement and chased after it, only to find himself deep in a canyon where sound did not carry. Miles watched from above, timing his throw perfectly. A net made of woven steel wire dropped from the canopy and yanked the alien into a chokehold. No gunfire. No warning. Just a wet thud as the alien's head cracked against the stone and stilled. His weapon was gone. His body left with nothing but a branch jabbed through the shoulder plate. Miles didn't kill him out of cruelty. He killed him because the creature would have killed every human without a second thought. Mercy had no place here. The forest had given them warnings. They ignored them. Now it gave them consequences. Zorath was now pacing like a cornered animal. He cursed the planet, the atmosphere, and even his own men. But he didn't curse the human. Because he couldn't find him. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, turning their own scans against them, their own instincts into liabilities. Zorath ordered a fire team to ignite part of the woods to flush the predator out. But the ignition drones malfunctioned. Smoke poured into their side of the formation instead. Miles had already sabotaged them. Fire was not a weapon he feared. Fire cleared underbrush. It made their positions obvious. He used the glow to backlight one of his decoys, a scarecrow made of alien armor and deer bones, and as one soldier fired, he set off a blast under their feet. The explosion knocked 2 down, not with fire, but with air and shock. A concussive claymore turned inside out using sand and old propane. They were losing discipline. He saw it in their aim, their hesitation, their breathing. Miles watched from a tree branch, 10 feet above them, perfectly still. One of the Varnak soldiers stepped beneath him, scanning the dark. Miles dropped in complete silence, slid a blade under the helmet seal, and let the body fall gently to the ground. Another mark carved into the dirt. Another message left on the flat stone. One word. Closer. The Varnak weren't hunters anymore. They were meat. And the forest had chosen its apex. The sun filtered through the thick canopy, creating patterns of light that danced on the forest floor, but to the Varnak survivors, it might as well have been the glare of a spotlight exposing their failure. Their group was down to half strength, their gear was glitching, and even the air tasted like fear. Every step they took felt like an invitation for something to break, something to snap, something to vanish. Zorath no longer shouted orders. He moved with a blade in hand and eyes darting at every twitch of green. His confidence was eroding, not in great bursts, but in the slow, grinding way a glacier tears apart stone. Miles was already 3 steps ahead. He watched their desperation growing and saw exactly when it would reach its peak. That was when smart enemies made irrational decisions. Panic made even elite killers stupid. He tracked them silently from high in the trees, his weight balanced perfectly, his boots wrapped in strips of tanned deer hide to muffle every shift. It wasn't about speed. It was about sound. The one who controlled silence controlled the kill. Below, one of the aliens adjusted his visor and muttered something guttural, something like a prayer, and Miles tilted his head. Even apex predators could start praying when they no longer understood the rules. Miles moved toward the creek he knew they would have to cross. The current wasn't fast, but it was loud enough to mask his approach. He rigged it with jagged rocks, submerged punji sticks, and a few low-tension vines meant to create loud splashes when triggered. But he didn't set them all at once. He let them cross, then snapped a single vine after the second soldier reached the other side. The sudden splash made them spin, weapons up. Then came the second splash. Then silence. Nothing followed. Miles wanted their minds frayed before their bodies followed. He retreated to the mossy ridge that overlooked the north slope and waited. This was where they would try to regroup. The terrain narrowed into a natural bottleneck, and the ground dipped into slick mud from a week of spring storms. Miles had turned this section into a maze. He'd spent the last year mapping these woods, learning the way water moved, how the light shifted, and where every animal preferred to sleep. Now, he funneled the aliens like cattle. Their advanced scanners couldn't process organic clutter, and to them, the mud was just bad footing. They didn't realize they were walking into a silent corridor he'd designed from scratch. One of them noticed the symbols carved into the trees. Not random marks. Intentional patterns, like tribal warnings or territory claims. But they weren't written in Varnak language. They were human, ancient, maybe native. The one who paused to examine them got an arrow in the thigh. Not a plasma bolt. Not a laser. A sharpened wooden shaft dipped in fermented sap. It didn't kill him. That wasn't the point. It screamed of human defiance, of old knowledge, of simplicity made deadly. The Varnak carried weapons that could punch holes through tank armor, and they were being stalked by a man using sticks, rope, and fire. Zorath ordered a retreat back to the shuttle beacon, but the signal was gone. Not jammed. Ripped out of the earth and dragged 20 feet into the woods, where it now sat upright with something carved into its metal casing. The letters were smeared with blood, maybe human, maybe not. It read, "This forest is older than your war." It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. The Warlords had arrived assuming Earth was a soft world, full of soft creatures. They thought of humans as slow-evolving prey with technology but no instincts. They forgot one thing. Instinct was born in the woods, and men like Miles never let it die. Korzath, High General of the Varnak Dominion, watched the situation unfold from the orbiting ship and made his decision. He would descend personally. Not out of necessity, but pride. To him, this was now a matter of honor. He had led planetary raids on fortified worlds, defeated species bred for war, and leveled entire cities from orbit. And yet here he was, watching a forest on an underdeveloped planet erase his best trackers one by one. It was intolerable. He donned his armor and landed with an escort of 2 of his remaining elite guards, stepping into the forest as though it were a throne room waiting for judgment. The trees didn't bow. They breathed. Miles saw the new arrival immediately. Larger, armored in black, his presence shifting the atmosphere like thunder. This one was different. Not because he was stronger, but because he didn't hide. He walked like someone used to being feared. Miles didn't fear him. He simply made note of his weight, his stride, the length of his weapon, and the time between each breath. This wasn't a monster. It was a man in a cage, roaring too loud to hear the lock opening. Korzath called out in a booming voice, challenging the human. He promised pain, death, and disgrace. He threatened to torch the forest, erase it from orbit, and paint its ashes into war songs. Miles said nothing. Instead, he placed the hunting spear into the ground in front of Korzatha's path. A simple wooden pole, stripped of bark, carved with the same symbols the soldiers had seen. On it hung a Varnak helmet, hollowed, filled with earth, and growing a tiny green sapling. Life from death. A message more powerful than any threat. Korzath stepped over it. Mistake number 1. The ground beneath him shifted slightly, but not enough to notice until his boots sank a half-inch too deep. A delay charge planted beneath a natural sinkhole detonated, not with shrapnel, but force. It launched the high general 6 feet into the air and into a net woven from steel cable and tree bark. He slammed against the trunk, stunned. Miles didn't attack. He just watched. Waiting. One of the guards fired wildly into the trees, burning half the canopy with plasma bolts. The second moved to free Korzath, but his foot caught on a vine that wasn't a vine at all. It was a trigger. A deadfall of jagged slate and river stone dropped from a pulley system made from roots and bone. The second guard died without a sound. Korzath cut himself free and shouted again. Still, no answer. Miles had given him a choice. Leave, or keep walking. The general, pride bruised and now caked in forest dirt, chose to advance. Miles grinned. The forest had accepted him long ago. Now it would feed him one final prize. He vanished once more into the canopy. One more symbol carved into the bark. A new mark. The final trap was set. The forest was awake. And it was ready. The forest was quieter than it had ever been. Not the kind of quiet born from peace, but the thick, suffocating silence that came before a storm. Even the insects had stopped. No birds. No squirrels. Nothing but the occasional groan of the trees stretching overhead, as if the woods themselves were bracing for what came next. Miles stood still on a wide branch above the ravine, watching the remaining Varnak soldiers stagger below. What had once been a proud hunting party was now a handful of limping beasts, bruised, burned, and broken in places their pride couldn't hide. Their armor was scratched. Their movements were no longer disciplined but erratic. They scanned too much and trusted nothing. Good. That meant the forest had done its job. They were no longer invaders. They were prey. Korzath still walked upright, but even his steps were slower now. The great warlord who had once conquered 3 planets in a single cycle had a streak of dried blood running down his neck from where the net wires had scraped his plating. His breathing was louder than it should have been. Not just from exertion. From fury. From disbelief. This world had insulted him. No weapons. No cities. No grand defense. Just one man and 1,000 trees. And yet, his troops were gone, his beacon destroyed, and the comms to his ship blocked again. Every step he took felt like an echo of the last mistake. Miles was done with simple traps. Now it was about pressure. It was about stripping their sense of direction, disorienting them so badly they couldn't tell if they were making progress or walking in circles. He started by mimicking one of their own. Using a damaged Varnak communicator, he looped the voice of the last guard who had died in the deadfall, splicing together words from their command database into a stuttering pattern that suggested he was still alive and giving orders from the North Ridge. The surviving soldiers perked up at once. They latched onto the voice like starving animals to scraps of food. They veered off their path to follow the sound. The path was booby-trapped with old Forest Service equipment. Miles had collected pressure-sensitive ground sensors and modified them to detonate signal flares upward instead of outward. As the aliens moved, each flare exploded in the air above their heads, lighting them up in harsh, blinding bursts. To them, it felt like they were being targeted from above. In panic, they scattered, breaking formation, slamming into each other, some of them firing blindly at the sky. Miles didn't even have to engage them directly. He let the noise, the confusion, the heat of their own fear finish what the trap started. One of them fell into a marsh pit. The others didn't hear him go under. He struggled, screamed, gurgled, then vanished beneath the mud. Another turned too fast and caught a branch to the face, losing his balance and breaking his own visor on a rock. It was brutal, it was messy, and it was earned. They had come to take something that wasn't theirs. And Miles had decided the forest would take something back. Korzath pressed forward alone now, separating himself from the stragglers. He followed no path, cut through no vines. He simply walked, shoulders squared, blade drawn, whispering to himself. He had grown up on the ice plains of Thryzok, trained in jungles of acid air, killed in the sulfur pits of Krellin. He had never lost to a single combatant. And yet now, on a backwater planet with no real military, he had lost nearly everything. Still, he refused to accept it. Somewhere in these trees, this ghost of a man was watching him. Waiting. Korzath would not die hunted. He would face the enemy and crush him. Or he would make the forest burn with him. Miles knew the general was nearing the final trap. The whole battle had been staged to bring him here. Not by force. By choice. To make Korzath think this was the spot to end it. The clearing ahead had been cleaned of brush, shaped into a natural arena with sloped sides, surrounded by fallen trees and jagged stone. At its center stood a lone figure. Miles. No shadows. No tricks. Just a man standing with a knife in one hand and a crooked spear in the other. He waited. Unmoving. His expression unreadable. Korzath stepped into the clearing with the swagger of a beast ready to kill. The sun filtered through the high canopy, casting long slashes of gold across the dirt. They faced each other in silence. Korzath raised his blade. Miles did not raise his. Not yet. He waited. One breath. Two. The alien lunged, plasma blade flashing in a wide arc. Miles dropped low, rolled, and sliced upward across the general's side, just enough to cut. Just enough to draw blood. Korzath roared and came again, faster, heavier, relentless. Miles used the slope, ducked behind fallen limbs, dodged with inches to spare. He didn't try to outmatch strength. He used momentum. Direction. Gravity. Korzath was being baited without realizing it. Each step the general took churned loose soil. His footing slipped more with every charge. Miles led him in a spiral, keeping him moving, keeping him angry. Then, on the final pass, Korzath lunged full weight at Miles standing near a cracked boulder. Miles jumped aside. The boulder was not solid. It was hollowed out, reinforced from behind, and rigged to break. Korzath's weight collapsed it. And underneath, buried in a pit, were the scavenged blades of the dead. Dozens of them. Pointed upward. Hidden in moss. The general fell in with a thundering crash. Silence followed. Then a slow, gasping, choked breath. Miles stepped closer. He looked down at the once mighty warlord lying impaled in a nest of his own dead men's weapons. Korzath tried to raise his arm. It trembled, then dropped. Miles didn't speak. He didn't gloat. He simply turned away, leaving the general to face the forest alone. The last two surviving soldiers found the clearing minutes later. They saw their general broken and the man who did it standing calmly by a tree, wiping his blade with a cloth. They did not raise their weapons. They dropped them. Miles pointed toward the east, toward a path he had cleared with torches and white ribbons. The message was clear. Leave. Now. Take the story with you. They didn't argue. They didn't look back. They ran, not just from the man, but from the woods that no longer slept. Miles waited until their footfalls faded. Then he knelt, ran his fingers through the dirt, and carved a new symbol in the earth beside the broken boulder. A mark of closure. One that meant the hunt was over. For now. The air was thicker now, but it was no longer from tension. It was the aftertaste of fire, metal, blood, and sap mingling in a forest that had fought like a living beast. Smoke drifted from the edge of the eastern ridge where one of the plasma rifles had set off a patch of dried underbrush. Birds returned slowly, cautiously. A single crow cried from a dead branch above the ravine. The forest was reclaiming its silence, not the stillness of fear, but the kind born of victory. The kind earned through struggle. Miles stood at the edge of the clearing, boots planted in the moss, watching the path the last two Varnak soldiers had taken. He had allowed them to flee. That was intentional. They needed to survive, not for mercy's sake, but for memory. Their story would do what bullets could not. It would spread. And it would warn. Back in orbit, the remaining warlords received the fractured footage of the battle from the only drone that had made it out intact. It was grainy and partially corrupted by the electromagnetic pulses Miles had set off near the beginning, but the core of it remained. They saw the bodies. They saw the traps. They saw Korzath, the undefeated general, impaled by the weapons of his own soldiers, his blood soaking into the dirt of a planet they had called primitive. They watched as Miles stood above him, silent, composed, unmoved by the chaos. It was not a warrior they saw. It was a relic of something older. A being that did not chase glory, did not scream in victory. He simply endured. And that endurance was more terrifying than any battlefield. The footage was quickly analyzed by Council intelligence and tagged with the highest threat level for unclassified ground engagements. Earth, once marked as low priority and underdeveloped, was quietly reclassified. The new file did not include missiles or population data. It did not talk about cities or weapons per capita. It included a single message: contact with surface forces not advised. Threat probability too high. Recommended engagement: orbital only or avoid entirely. Beneath the warning, a still image from the drone's final transmission showed Miles vanishing into the forest, nothing visible but his silhouette against the trees and the slight tilt of his head, as if he was aware he was being watched. As if he had allowed the camera to see him, only once, to make a point. Miles moved through the forest like part of its bloodstream. He returned to the cabin tucked near the edge of a slope, camouflaged so well it could have been a shadow. Inside were tools, maps, dried meat, and 2 books left open to different pages. One was an old forestry manual. The other was a worn copy of survival tactics written by soldiers long forgotten. He sat down slowly, removed his boots, and ran his hands through a bowl of cool water. Not for washing. Just to feel it. He closed his eyes for a moment. His muscles ached, his ribs were bruised, and one shoulder had a deep scrape from where a plasma round had grazed him. But he was intact. The forest had taken care of its own. He had always believed that the trees spoke in their own language, a hum beneath the wind, a rhythm deeper than roots. Tonight they were quiet. But in that silence, he heard approval. At dawn, he climbed the west bluff and stood where the valley opened wide. From there, he could see the streaks in the sky, black scars left by the drop pods. Most of them were still smoldering wreckage. One had been overrun by vines already, nature pulling it down without hesitation. The forest had no use for monuments. Everything that fell was repurposed, reused, and erased. Miles stood for a long time, arms crossed, watching the clouds shift. A deer stepped into view, paused, sniffed the air, and walked past him as if nothing had changed. As if he were just another part of the scenery. That made him smile. The animals had returned. The balance was stitching itself back together. Later, he hiked to the edge of the path he had cleared for the fleeing Varnak. The trail ribbons still fluttered, tied high between trunks. He stepped into the center of the trail and planted something in the soil. A piece of the general's chest plate. Burned black, scorched at the edges. He had carved something into the metal with a survival knife. 3 symbols. Not alien. Not military. Just human marks. The first was a tree. The second was an eye. The third was a broken blade. He didn't say what they meant. He didn't have to. It was for them to interpret, and for others to fear. Miles turned away, left the metal half buried and covered it with pine needles. The message wasn't for today. It was for the next visitor who came uninvited. The forest now had a warning. A marker. Not a wall, but a promise. He made his way to the ridgeline one last time before sunset. A single drone, small and silent, hovered in the distance near the edge of the upper tree line. He didn't raise his weapon. He just stood there, arms by his side, and stared. The drone hovered for 3 seconds. Then 5. Then it blinked red and turned away. Miles waited until it vanished beyond the clouds before he exhaled. That night, he built a small fire, not for warmth, but to cook. Simple things. Venison. Roots. A little salt. He ate without hurry. Not because he was tired, though he was, but because the fire was the only thing that needed him in that moment. He looked up once as an owl flew past. He nodded. The bird did not stop. Miles didn't speak to the trees that night. He didn't need to. The forest had accepted what had happened. It had changed. Grown teeth. Not because it wanted to. Because it had to. He didn't see himself as a hero. He wasn't even sure he liked what he had become. But he knew one thing with certainty. If they came again, if they tried once more to conquer this ground, they would find that Earth didn't forget. Earth remembered every step, every fire, every broken promise. And in the deepest part of its woods, it had a scout who hunted in silence and carved lessons in blood. Somewhere in a distant part of the galaxy, a council argued about Earth's future. Debates were held. Protocols were rewritten. Armies reconsidered their maps. Some laughed. Others warned. And one by one, they began to understand. Earth did not boast its strength. It let its ghosts do the talking. Miles tossed the last log into the fire and watched the embers float up, swallowed by the stars. Behind him, the trees creaked gently in the wind. He stood, wrapped the coals in dirt, and walked back into the dark. No words. No sound. Just a shadow returning home, to the only place that still remembered how to hunt.